Being a housewife, or full-time mum, or homemaker, however you want to describe it, is a great privilege that women have enjoyed, made possible by the work of men. It's a badge of honour and success for a woman to be called a housewife. It's not an insult. Yet somehow, business and government have convinced women that not having a job is somehow demeaning.
Feminist ideology opposes families because they see family situation as families as situations wherein women are oppressed to stay at home to look after the children, whereas men get all the goodies trundling out to work. But in fact, I mean, the truth is very much the opposite, that historically the men have been the workhorses who have had to go out to work to support their families, and women saw themselves very much as privileged to be able to stay at home and to have a man look after them.
Most people on this planet aspire to a situation where they no longer need to work for a living. But somehow, women have been persuaded to give this up in favour of wage slavery. Feminism must be seen as possibly the most fantastically successful piece of PR ever conceived and executed. And that's not all that's been done. The female contraceptive pill introduced in the 1960s was the major enabler to force women into the workplace. Women like to believe that the pill was about sexual liberation for women. It wasn't. The pill allowed women to control their fertility so that they could enter the workforce without unpredictable pregnancy. In other words, the pill made women more useful to business and more employable. It made women more like men. The pill, combined with the female politics of the time, was the spark and fuel of feminism.
I'll never forget when I turned the corner at the Hotel Plaza. I could not see to the end. It was the most exciting day. It was the time that the women's movement became a movement.
The ideas and plans of business and government to properly exploit women by putting them to work truly came to fruition during this period. The key was to make women angry. Government and business found this very easy to do.
The campaign in the United States is another stage in a long fight. Since the start of the century, women have been battling attitudes that hold them back. Yet around the world, half the people still can't enjoy all the freedoms the other half take for granted.
Newspapers and television broadcasting in the 70s was dominated by feminist journalists. This enabled the hateful and biased views of feminism to become mainstream.
The most successful part of it is that at that point in the 70s, if you think about it, the majority of women who were journalists internationally were very heavy radical feminists. So they had the women's pages. And of course male journalists and male editors, seeing it as, in quotes, a woman's problem, left it to them. And very quickly there was a savage kind of censorship, and anybody who dared argue was in very serious trouble.
If you don't agree with us, you are against us. It's a politically correct game. It's intimidate. You cannot speak your mind because you are deemed to be offending people. And the only people you can offend with impunity are men, particularly white, heterosexual men. You've got everything of those, that everything is stacked against you.
They obviously put a great deal of effort into moving outside of the status of victims. But what they've got now is all the advantages and protection that comes with the status of victims when they're not actually victims anymore. And they would say themselves that they're not victims, and yet they claim all the powers of victims, so you can do no wrong.
Whenever men try to speak out, or articles are written that in some way oppose the feminist agenda, women's groups, women's lobby groups, will stir up in their gullible female supporters hysteria, and they will claim and they will argue that the attacks that are made on the feminist movement and on the female point of view create a climate of fear amongst the vulnerable females in the community, and therefore they should not be articulated at all.
The problem is that they still think of any comment from a man or any attempt of a man to gain power as being at the expense of women. So men are being hobbled in trying to gain power for themselves, because any man gaining power is gaining power at the expense of women across the board.
So in other words, the very act of protesting against the feminist movement is deemed by them to be creating a climate of fear. So men must not speak in case those women who happen to be vulnerable out there hear you.
No man can help themselves, because when a man does that, they're taking it away from women.
Why was it female psychology that took over, if you like?
Well, firstly, they were in charge of publishing. They spend 70% of the money They are therefore very important from the point of view, say, newspapers and the media in general with selling their wares. They will lobby companies and suggest that if they are supporting views which are inconsistent with the feminist movement, they are supporting abuse against women.
So what women do is they can be oppressive, and as we've seen with fathers' rights, they are being oppressive, but they will never even think of themselves being oppressive. They won't even imagine that they're being oppressive, because in their mind, in their world, they're victims, and they're still victims.
For the last goodness knows how many years, time and time again, one would read in the newspapers that the laws were somehow biased against women. Can you believe it? Lawyers, A, B, C down to Z, would write about how women were unfairly treated with regard to the alimony, their alimony in divorce, what have you. Baroness Kennedy, Helena Kennedy, people like that. They would proudly proclaim who they were and what their objectives were. 2 years ago, a barrister wrote in the Times an article which quite meekly pointed out that men were sometimes unfairly treated in the law. He didn't dare give his name. This was only 2 years ago. And so my point is that that's how much intimidation people feel about speaking out.